Woe be unto him who opens one of the 7 gateways to hell, because through that gateway, evil will invade the world.
Valentine's Day is a curse that'll live on, and no one will know as the years come and go of the horror from long time ago. In this little town, when the 14th comes round, there's a silence and fear in the air. Remember the morn that the legend was born, all the shock and the horror was there. Oh, the legend, they say, on a Valentine's Day is a curse that'll live on, and no one will know as the years come and go of the horror from long time ago. And no one will know as the years come and go of the horror from long time ago.
Before we start, I would like everyone to know these films are from 1981 according to Internet Movie Database. Each film in the 25 was listed as a horror film on Internet Movie Database, Letterboxd, or both. I do understand that dates listed on Internet Movie Database aren't always the wide release dates, but due to the number of films watched, it's the best way to go about this for this year and future ones. Also remember, these are just my favorites. It doesn't mean that I believe these are truly the best or most historically important films of the year, but I'm sure some of them qualify as well. When one thinks of the year 1981, they can't help but recall some parallels from roughly 10 years prior. In 1970, Dario Argento changed the landscape of genre cinema forever with his directorial debut, The Bird with the Crystal Plumage. The film was followed by numerous other gialli, and 2 films by the director himself, completing his Animals trilogy. Dario is often cited for starting the gialli craze in the early 70s, and although his film was a catalyst for many other gialli, There were gialli being made many years prior, some not being fully realized to what the genre would become, but nonetheless, mostly, if not entirely, all gialli. Mario Bava had Blood and Black Lace and The Evil Eye, while the likes of Umberto Lenzi had a quartet of films with Carol Baker, 3 of which were made before or made the same year as Bird. These 2 maestros were not alone. Giuliano Questi, Luigi Bazoni, Massimo Dallamano Dellamini, and Ricardo Freda were just some names that made gialli in the 60s. So why does Dario get all the credit? Well, because the movie was a hit. And when the waves of gialli came out in 71 and 72, they were made or greenlit because Bird was such a popular title. So when we look about it a decade later, we can't help but think Friday the 13th from 1980. Of course, there were slashers before, and even ones that were highly influential and fully realized. Halloween, for example, the one that is often credited as the first true slasher, although one could look at just 4 years prior to Black Christmas or several of the films listed as proto-slashers, which some think are true blue slashers as well. Even the Italians dabbled in this genre, with 1973's Torso. So it's not a stretch by any means to look at this interesting phenomena of horror repeating itself just 10 years later. Before and after Halloween, event and holiday slashers did exist. Prom Night, To All Good Night, Terror Train, New Year's Evil, all 1980. But after Friday the 13th, the following year, not only spawned dozens of slashers in its wake of popularity, but it spawned a sequel, Friday the 13th Part 2, and even a sequel to the original Halloween that added gore instead of suspense in the style of, you guessed it, Friday the 13th. So in terms of comparison, one could say that Halloween is Mario Bava's Blood and Black Laced, and Dario Argento's Bird with the Crystal Plumage is Friday the 13th. Not in terms of quality, but in terms of influence and timing. At the time, many of these slashers were dismissed and hated by the critics, and a huge populace of the general public.
Gee, I guess I didn't love it very much. Was it only 2 years ago that we were praising a movie called Halloween? We thought it was kind of nice, had some style and wit to it. This movie is about the 7th direct ripoff of Halloween. We have New Year's Evil, Prom Night, Friday the 13th, Terror Train. They all have the same formula. Something terrible happens 20 years ago or 10 years ago. Then there's a party and all the teenagers get together in the same place, the old train or the old deserted mine shaft or something, and the berserk maniac comes down on them with a knife or a pickaxe or something.
But over time, many of these slashers from 1981 would become some of the all-time greats. And not just the franchise films like Halloween 2 and Friday 2, but a lot of the one-offs. The Burning, My Bloody Valentine, Happy Birthday to Me, Night School, Funhouse, Madhouse, Butcher Baker, Nightmare Maker, The Prowler, Madman, Just Before Dawn, Hell Night, Final Exam, Nightmare, Hospital Massacre, Absurd, Graduation Day, The Fan, Don't Go in the Woods, Alone, Eyes of a Stranger, Home Sweet Home, Scream, and even a parody, Student Bodies. Some of these films ended up being remade several years later, often after uncut versions were found and they were reevaluated after the popularity of such films as Scream, 1996. At the time of their creation, things just aren't as appreciated as they should be. Again, we have a lot of films that flirt with the line of the slasher. Some come across as character studies, thrillers, or even monster movies in some aspects. But nonetheless, they all share a lot of DNA with the slasher genre. After all, horror is a trajectory, and it's forever evolving, taking pieces from the previous established genres, either by gimmick or design. Some of the biggest tropes emerged from this year, or continued them in an abundant fashion. The dual killer. Films like Just Before Dawn and Hell Night set up the possibility of there being more than one, and they pay it off in a couple truly great scares. Also, the idea of a deformed or mentally challenged killer. After seeing Jason drown in the lake in the first film, he is back as an adult. Ashamed of his face, hidden beneath a sack, while others like Madman sport his bitten off nose, and Cropsy at times shows his burnt face. If Jason, Madman, and Cropsy weren't enough to put 81 as a year of memorable slasher killers, don't forget the likes of the twins from Just Before Dawn, the Garth family, Rosemary's Killer, Harry Warden, Body by Jake, George Tatum, the geek from Funhouse, or Rottweiler and an Evil Sister, The Breather, and Michael fucking Myers. Not to mention several other hidden killers who would be revealed at the climax of the film as part of the school alumni or faculty. Final Exam, Graduation Day, Night School, Happy Birthday to Me. There's so much crossover and similarities between many of these films, it's no surprise that many of the fans shun the slasher and tired of it quickly. For example, Madman, The Burning, and Friday the 13th Part 2 share a campfire storytelling moment, where some of the scenes look almost identical. Hell Night also has a huge setup in a similar fashion. A few slashers of the year even have their own folk songs created for them. Don't Go in the Woods Alone, My Bloody Valentine, and Madman. The similarities don't end there. There are 2 Valentine-oriented slashers, 2 hospital slashers, there are 4 school-oriented ones, several deformed killers as mentioned, and even a shared urination scene. One would think from the long-winded opening, slashers were the only thing happening in 1981, but there were several recurring themes and subgenres. For example, one can't help but notice a sibling bend in the films, whether it's the Italian shocker Madhouse, the American slashers Hell Night, Just Before Dawn, or even some of the Asian films, including Island of Evil Spirits. The sibling mechanism in horror has been done many years prior. One only has to look back to something like The Palmas Sisters or The Innocents. With the event slasher and the family sibling bend being so prevalent, one surely would notice the birthday trend in 1981 as well. The aforementioned Madhouse is building up to a birthday, creating a sense of dread, as is the Australian film Alison's Birthday. By using a ticking clock that is building to the end of the film, it leaves a very uneasy feeling throughout. One can't forget J. Lee Thompson's Happy Birthday to Me, which is a much more influential slasher than I think people give credit to. Finally, even The Killer Kids from Bloody Birthday, which centers around the birth of 3 murderous kids born on the same day during a solar eclipse. This one, of course, recalling Village of the Damned and the Bad Seed. Although a trio of killer kids is quite the handful, the film The Pit sure manages to pack in one of the year's most demented kids in Jamie, who, along with the help of his favorite stuffed animal, Teddy, wreak havoc on a small town with a group of hidden troglodytes. The small town horror at the hands of children doesn't end there, and the film Kiss Daddy Goodbye. A pair of telekinetic siblings decide to get revenge for their father's death and take it out on a biker gang. We jump from young to old characters when we look at some of the ghost stories of the year. The year prior sported some of the heavy hitters of the subgenre, so it only makes sense that the adaptation of Ghost Story would be made, sporting 4 classic actors haunted by a fatal mistake in their youth. While The Nesting carries a similar plot with a slightly sleazier tinge, as the horrors of the past took place in a brothel. Not all ghosts haunt the elderly, as we look at the strange Wendigo story in Ghost Keeper, which lifts a bit from The Shining, but it's not exactly the only film this year that takes a couple pages from the Kubrick film. Not all ghost films are created equal. The film Night of Horror is considered one of the worst horror films ever made, by a decent margin too. From the one-shot exposition to the poor quality cinematography, it earns it. Totalitarian societies and the end of the world were rampant in 1981. The world as we know it would change due to alien invasion, divine intervention, demonic possession, or the Antichrist. These feelings of hopelessness, isolation, and loss of individualism could be a reflection of the ongoing Cold War. Films like Possession even used the backdrop of the Berlin Wall to exacerbate the misery and feeling of being confined. Sam Neill and Isabella Adjani play a married couple trapped in this hell, former lovers turned to monsters, and maybe even devils. Sam Neill is no stranger to this sort of character, with his turn in this year's Omen 3, The Final Conflict, a large big-budget franchise film with plenty of good acting and set pieces. On the other hand, biblical horrors weren't always handled with such finesse and resources. Years of the Beast and Early Warnings were a couple films about the rapture that were well-intended, just suffered a bit from their budgets. While something like A Day of Judgment started out as a bit more of a wholesome warning about sin and debauchery turned into more of a horror film after some reshoots. Original charm puts this one a tad above the previous mentioned films. Day of the Triffids is another film that shows the end of the world in a dystopic society. Although the means are a bit different, Atropados, on the other hand, leaves the idea of the world ending in the mind of the audience after a pair of unlikely people are trapped in a collapsed building together, alone with their thoughts and hopes for survival. A few films still manage to capture the feelings of misery and isolation without being about the complete end of the world. Things like War of the Worlds, Next Century show us a totalitarian society about the horrors of an alien invasion, and how easily the human populace can be manipulated into believing anything. No Mercy, No Future shows the life and times of a mentally ill young woman from a rich family who completely destroys her life because of her problem. The backdrop is so cold and distant, it makes for one of the bleakest films of the year. Right up there with Possession and Kizamata. The film Rhythm of a Crime carries that bleak backdrop, but instead of focusing on some sort of outside invasion, it looks inward, about man's violence against man and the obsession of probability that can lead a man to seal his own fate. The end of the world is a scary thing, and it seems that it would always be a focus in the horror genre and outside of it. A lot of times there are films that flirt with the genre, while others completely embrace it. The Beyond is considered by many to be gore maestro Lucio Fulci's finest hour, with its nightmare logic, amazing score, and breathtaking visuals. Beyond is not only about the end of the world through the outpouring of hell onto Earth, but it actually shows what is beyond the gates of hell. We see firsthand the impact on its characters. In 1981, we still have some of the greatest horror directors working in their heyday. A couple have put horror in the back seat, such as John Carpenter with his film Escape from New York, which has a few horror elements, but fits more so in the post-apocalyptic action subgenre. Although this film would go on to inspire many films in the horror genre, it fits more with the first genre mentioned. George Romero has stopped work on the Dead films and other horror for one of his most personal films, Night Riders. The reflection of his life and hardships in the film are evident, and although this is his least horror film, besides There's Always Vanilla, it's one of his best. As for legend directors who continued their horror careers, we have a slew of them, including Tobe Hooper with The Funhouse, a film with more universal horror iconography than you can shake a stick at. Hooper made this little gem after being fired off the British production Venom, which was eventually directed by Piers Haggard from Blood on Satan's Claw fame. Lucio Fulci with 3 films, the aforementioned Beyond, the Lovecraft-inspired violent haunted house picture, The House by the Cemetery, and the Poe adaptation, The Black Cat. Larry Cohen has his silly spoof Full Moon High and his TV thriller See China and Die. Wes Craven has his religious-oriented horror, where it seems he is ridiculing his overly religious background with Deadly Blessing, a sort of aping The Hills Have Eyes, where Craven seems to kill his own family in that venture. David Cronenberg continued his reign as a leading Canadian horror master with his head-exploding shocker Scanners. Sam Raimi makes his feature-length directorial debut with the groundbreaking The Evil Dead. Not released widely for a couple of years, this one first screened in 1981, so this is where it will sit. One of the most grueling horror experiences in horror history. This one really helped move the splatter subgenre forward, part Equinox and all gore. Evil Dead made The Cabin in the Woods its own subgenre, and Possession was back in a huge and different way. Horror comedy directors Joe Dante and John Landis both had their werewolf masterpieces this year, with Dante's The Howling, based off a book, and Landis's An American Werewolf in London. Both are great and fascinating looks at the werewolf genre. The rules are all different, but managed to pay homage to the classics of yesteryear. Of course, these weren't the only 2 like-and-style films of the year, but the way their popularity soared, I'm sure most forget about the well-done Wolfen, where shapeshifters focus on the rich who plan to gentrify their feeding grounds, Cohen's picture, previously mentioned, the psychological look at werewolves in the film Wolf Hour, which leaves a lot unanswered, but the end result as a film is very satisfying. Nashi's remake of his classic horror tale involving vampires and werewolves, Night of the Werewolf, and we even have a quick appearance from werewolves in things like Monster Club and National Mummy. As for some more well-respected directors that continued their foray into horror, we have almost an uncountable number. First, a handful of Italian greats. Umberto Lenzi wrapped his Cannibal trilogy with one of the sickest films ever made, Cannibal Ferox. Andrea Bianchi directed one of the weirdest films to date with his sleazy, cheesy, yet scary and bizarre zombie film Burial Ground. Ovidio G.S. Anitis had Madhouse. Action director Ennio G. Castellari had his Italian Jaws ripoff, The Last Shark, where Vic Morrow tries to fill the boots of Robert Shaw. This one has an interesting backstory due to Universal not appreciating success of the film and filing a lawsuit. Prolific writer Ernesto Gastaldi, with the help of Vittorio Salinero, directed Screams in the Night, a bizarre, almost nightmare giallo, where a group of people are stranded in the woods and picked off one by one. almost sounds more like a slasher. Besides directing the super sleazy exploitation film Caligula and Messalina, Bruno Mattei managed to direct the nunsploitation picture The Other Hell, filled with a solid atmosphere and incredible blasphemy. It's well worth your time. Joe Diamano managed 2 films as well. Besides making a rip-off to Halloween, and at the same time a semi-sequel to Anthropophagus, in Absurd, we have his follow-up to Erotic Nights of the Living Dead, using the same sets and many of the same actors. This time around, it's a little bit more hardcore, but with a name like Porno Holocaust. Who would expect less? Dino Rinzi decided to tackle the fantasy genre with Ghost of Love, which bleeds into the horror genre as well. With music by Riz Ortolani and acting by Rami Schneider and Marcello Mastroianni, it's not a surprise it makes for a wonderful and haunting love ghost story. Finally, we have 2 true final films here. Mario Bava and Ricardo Freda's last films were both released in 1981. Freda and Bava were both friends, the former giving Bava his first shot at directing, so it sort of fits that their final films would both be released in 1981. Neither of them their finest work, but still 2 worth looking at. Freda's being Murder Obsession, a giallo-style gothic film about a haunted past, while Mario Bava's is part of a TV series entitled The Venus of Ill, about a cursed statue that manages to carry a certain haunting quality. This series also sported an episode by the aforementioned early gialli director Giulio Questi. Spain wasn't quite as prolific as Italy, but it still had a group of directors who worked constantly in the early 80s. Jess Franco, with one of his goriest and most popular titles, Bloody Moon, along with his women and prisoner film, Sodomania. Paul Naschy again steps behind the camera and directs himself in one of his finest efforts, Night of the Werewolf. Jose Larraz switches gears from the dark stigma to the comedic slapstick National Mummy. Eugenio Martin continues to put out solid work with Sobrenatural. Juan Piquer Simon flirts with the horror genre with Mystery on Monster Island, and although directed by a French director in Jean Roland, Zombie Lake is in fact a Spanish production started by Jess Franco himself. Roland also managed to direct Escapees as well. Cult director Valerian Borlacek directed a German/French co-production of his wildly sexual and bizarre Dr. Jekyll story, The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Miss Osborne, starring a handful of genre greats. Bollywood also turned in their version of the story as well, entitled Chehera Pi Chehera, as well as their own possession film, Sacred Golden Chain, and their take on the haunted hotel film, amply titled Hotel. Speaking of remakes and different takes on classics, we have many. The animated Monster of Frankenstein makes for a good follow-up to the previous year's Tomb of Dracula, where we have some out-and-out remakes including the Egyptian Rocky Horror Picture Show entitled Fangs, a South Korean remake of Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, A Monstrous Corpse, and an Indonesian remake of Friday the 13th entitled Wolf. Wolf wasn't the only horror that Indonesia put out. In fact, the whole of Asia was fairly busy with output this year. Lilik Sujo directed the classic Queen of Black Magic, as well as the lesser-known Magic Man, while Siswaro Guadama Putra directed The Warrior, Ghost with Hole, and the aforementioned Wolf. Not to mention the completely insane Mystics in Bali was also released, as well as Black Magic Lizard, Leech Wizard, and The Gate of Hell, which is a strange variation on the trope of taking shelter from the rain in an abandoned castle. As for Hong Kong, the Shaw brothers were in full swing, with 6 horror films, most of which with a police procedural tinge: Corpse Mania, Bewitched, Bloody Parrot, Black Lizard, Revenge of the Corpse, and Avengers from Hell, one of the only anthologies from this year. Well, along with The Monster Club and some Brazilian films. Corpse Mania truly stands out with its gialli influences and necromania, as does Bewitched with its rundown of strange spells and gross-out horror. Shaw wasn't the only one in Hong Kong making films. There were also some independents as well as Golden Harvest, the latter doing The Phantom Killer and the entertaining Dreadnought. A couple real standouts are The Imp, which is filled with thick atmosphere and good kills, Life After Life, it's a strange horror story about reincarnation, and finally Love Massacre, a psychological horror turned into overdrive in the final act. When we look towards Thailand, we have the strange fantasy epic Farah Rat Mara, which involves giants, eyeball ripping, and murdered offspring, and Ghost Money, a better-than-average film about a group of children who rob from the wrong corpse and end up in true harm's way. Japan starts the decade off a bit slow, mostly with Nakatsu erotic films that involve rape and rope fetishes, female teacher and rope hell, female beautician rope discipline, secretary rope discipline. Catching a pattern here? Zoom Up Sexual Crime Report. There's also a handful that share a little bit more DNA with the horror genre. The standouts from this being Angel Guts, Red Porno, and Daydream. There are, of course, a couple more classical horror films that break the mold, such as Island of Evil Spirits, Samurai Reincarnation, directed by legend Kiju Fukasaku, Dr. Onchanako's Horror Theater, a rare group of shorts by the creator of the wild Legend of the Stardust Brothers. Shinju Suzuki continued his Tasu Roman trilogy with the mystery thriller Kajiro-za. Summer of Demon, which is a retelling of a classic Japanese ghost story, and not the only one this year. The animated film Takaido Yatsuya Kadan. The anime is essentially the same story. But the biggest outlander of Japanese cinema is the extreme pig chicken suicide, which stands on its own in terms of filmmaking and ideas. South Korea contributed with an interesting trio of films, of course the previously mentioned Monstrous Corpse, but also the ritual-based horror mystery The Hut, which sports a great structure and an intriguing look into customs, as well as Suddenly in the Dark, a well-done film about paranoia and madness. Taiwan offered up a handful of films this year. The quality of prints is usually poor, and although they often share a lot of similarities and co-productions with Hong Kong films, they aren't the easiest films for the Western audience to understand or watch. The Devil is a standout, with its insane gross-out moments and extreme nature, while films like Shocking add bits of comedy in the vein of many Hong Kong films and make for an interesting watch. Love with Cloud is a solid revenge story from beyond the grave, while Wicked Wife prefers to use tigers as its vessel for its revenge. The Midnight was probably the most inept out of the group of Taiwan films and seemed to be missing quite a bit of the story. Although a promising enough opening, the film soon becomes a chore. Phoenix of the Ninja is more of a fantasy martial arts film, but as you deep dive into the genre, you will see many of these listed as horror films by some. A scene here and there might qualify, but often more times than not, they seem to fit into different genres. Night Evil Soul is an interesting film about a witch cursing a village with an army of cats. It's really a recut of a South Korean film entitled Grudge of the Moon Lady from the previous year. This would happen a few times in '81. The two biggest, of course, being the recut, rescored zombie holocaust entitled Dr. Butcher MD. Yes, he makes house calls. And Sergio Martino's Island of the Fishmen, which has been edited down and has a couple reshot scenes and a new opening with genre actors Mel Farah and Cameron Mitchell. God bless Cameron Mitchell. A strange phenomenon was happening in Brazil, where the filmmakers were told they could create films as violent and sexual as they liked, but had to avoid any political elements. This led to a group of films that somewhat feel like Toei's Pinky Violence movement, but of course they have their own style. The most popular of the ones watched from this year would be Violence and Flesh, about a group of escaped criminals who kidnap a group of filmmakers and rape and torture them until just desserts are served. A real ugly film, that seems to be this subgenre's MO. Lily and the Dirty is an interesting take on the serial killer subgenre, where we have a damaged woman going out at night and seducing men and killing them. Following two storylines eventually that do cross, the ending is worth sticking around for. Two Strange Women is broken up into two stories, both about psychological horror, murder, and premonition. The film that stands out most is the anthology Here, Freaks, not as a whole, but for the final story. The first two stories involve stalking, obsession, and voyeurism, but the real shock comes from the final story that involves dismemberment, cannibalism, and necrophilia, playing out like a precursor to the untold story. This final tale in this anthology came quite as a shock. In Canada, a slew of low-budget horror films were being made. They often had bizarre ideas or were rushed quickly for release. These were part of the tax shelter phenomenon, where even if the films failed, there wasn't nearly the risk involved. Maybe not all these films were made under such circumstances, but a lot of them certainly were. Cronenberg was no stranger to this sort of production, and had made a handful of very effective films before Scanners, but Scanners was being written while the film was in production at times. Lucky the result turned out as good as it did. My Bloody Valentine was created due to the success of Friday 13th, and even picked up by Paramount. Thankfully, it became a classic over time, and its uncut form became a beloved film. Happy Birthday to Me was directed by classic journeyman director J. Lee Thompson, who had a handful of incredible films under his belt. Happy Birthday plays a bit more like a giallo than some of its contemporaries, and that could be due to the style and experience from the director. I think something like The Pit is the poster child for the tax shelter movie, not due to its quality, but due to its absurdity and downright weirdness. It's hard to see anyone taking a chance on such a weird film. The Intruder is a very strange Canadian film that follows a strange traveler who somewhat corrupts the town by forcing out the good nature out of people. It feels like a TV film but sports nudity and sex. Lastly, there's Ghost Keeper, the subdued but very atmospheric take on the ghost story and Wendigo folktale. Australia had a few worth noting in 1981. Of course, the biggest one is Road Games, directed by genre favorite Richard Franklin, starring horror legend Jamie Lee Curtis in one of 2 roles, of course, this year, and Stacy Keach as a trucker who begins to suspect that someone on the road may be a serial killer. Allison's Birthday and the Survivor, directed by David Hemmings, feature many premonitions and red herrings, although by the time our characters find out, it's too late for them. On the opposite end of the spectrum is the sleazy exploitation film Ladies Stay Dead, where a killer not only sexually assaults people, but the sand. The Killing of Angel Street is listed as a horror film by some, but feels more like a made-for-TV thriller, although based on true events, it barely feels like a thriller, let alone a horror film. Although Amicus had ended, it didn't stop Milton Subotsky from hiring legendary Hammer/Amicus director Roy Ward Baker to do an anthology, with the talents of Donald Pleasance, Richard Johnson, John Carradine, Stuart Whitman, Brick Eklund, Patrick McGee, and Vincent Price, entitled Monster Club, which has 3 horror stories as well as a wraparound involving vampires, banshees, and ghouls. Of course, An American Werewolf in London was made by an American, but was a UK production. Norman J. Warren continued his horror filmography with Inseminoid, as did Piers Haggard with Venom. Low-budget director Michael J. Murphy directed a gothic thriller about inheritance and murder entitled Death in the Family. But the strangest horror film to come out of the UK this year has to be Death Shock, a softcore comedy horror film where a group of sex-crazed teenagers get picked off by a family of weirdos. Not quite considered masters, but fairly prolific directors from North America continued their horror streak as well. Joe Zito, Gary Sherman, Tom DeSimone, Ken Wiederhorn, Jeff Lieberman, Joe Lambreed, and Jerry Warren, with the Z-grade Frankenstein Island, also starring Cameron Mitchell. Classic directors stuck their toes in the genre with Ken Hughes and J. Lee Thompson, and Oliver Stone, future A-list director, also took a stab at the subgenre with The Hand, which, funny enough, is one of 2 killer hand movies from this year, the other being Demonoid, the former being more psychological, while the other being demonic. Demonic possession and forces were fairly strong in 81. We had, of course, Demonoid, as well as a slew of others. One of the heavy hitters being Evilspeak, sporting a wonderful cast of genre actors. It follows the story of Clint Howard, Cooper Smith, a young man bullied out of military school who accesses evil through a computer. There's also the incredibly well done Incubus, which features some truly dark moments involving rape and violence. Bruno Mattei's The Other Hell features nuns at the center of its demonic insanity. There's also Fear No Evil and the previously mentioned The Imp. A crossover demonic film is The Jaws of Satan, featuring the devil in the form of a giant killer snake who wreaks havoc on a small town, blending the animal attacks genre with the demonic one. As for the animals attacks films, we have a handful, many of which are untraditional. Venom, for one, directed by Piers Haggard, from Blood on Satan's Claw fame, is more in the vein of a thriller, but sports a killer Black Mamba, as well as killer performances by Oliver Reed, Klaus Kinski, Sterling Hayden, Susan George, and more. The venom spewed from the snake is only matched by the venom that Reed and Kinski have for each other, on camera and off. We have one killer shark film with The Last Shark, which, as mentioned before, borrows a bit from Jaws. Remember, precautions were made. Fulci's rendition of The Black Cat is more supernatural and focuses on revenge and superstition than an all-out animals attack film, but it does use the vessel of a feline. Moving on to some larger cats, we have the standard TV film Savage Harvest, which plays like Night of the Living Dead with lions, and the other being the completely insane Roar, which isn't traditionally a horror film, but I dare anyone to find scenes of animals attacking from any other film scarier than Roar. When we shift towards TV horror, we notice a huge abundance compared to the previous year. With the rise of people owning a television, it's no surprise that the rise of the TV movie special also happened. The true standout, of course, is Dark Knight of the Scarecrow. With a handful of excellent character actors and a tragic setup, this film cemented its legacy as one of the all-time greats in the TV horror genre. There are, of course, many other standouts. Midnight Offerings, featuring Melissa Sue Anderson from Little House on the Prairie and Happy Birthday to Me, Intruder Within, a precursor to The Thing, The Monsters Return and Monsters Revenge, This House Possessed, No Place to Hide, Savage Harvest, and Evil Stalks This House, which was part of a lost TV broadcast hosted by Christopher Lee entitled Tales of the Haunted. The Jack Palance story is all that remains. Leading to more of a thriller territory, we have Terror Among Us and The Killing at Hell's Gate, featuring a great supporting role from Brian James. When we shift our attention to British TV, we see another group of interesting films and a couple miniseries. Day of the Trippage is a great retelling of the classic science fiction story, while Nightmare Man is a decent murder mystery with a horror bent. As for the films or recuts in the films, we have Miss Morrison's Ghost, which is a very subdued but well-made and sad story about two women who witness a strange phenomenon and decide to be true to themselves and risk the future of their all-girls school. The Orchard End Murder is a dark and unsettling look at murder and a cover-up. The Chelsea Murders is a procedural recut of a miniseries that leaves the end result a bit mediocre. And Christmas Spirits is a decent holiday ghost story about a woman who plans to use a house to shoot a haunting film and becomes actually haunted. Italy contributed with The Devil's Game, 6 short movies, some of which directed by classic Italian directors based on classic horror literature. And New Zealand had a strange kids film, The Monster's Christmas, which follows a child and his adventures with a group of monsters. As is the case with the last year, the shadow of Alien still looms strongly. First up is the Roger Corman-produced Galaxy of Terror, which sports a great cast of genre actors, some of which would go on to do many great things. Also, English director Norman J. Warren found some inspiration from Alien with his film Inseminoid, featuring Judy Geeson, who goes on a murderous rampage when she's possessed by an alien. We also have a couple lesser-known space station horror films, Warp Speed, which pits crew member versus crew member in a strange recollection of events via ESP, and a parody, That Creature Wasn't Nice, which lets Leslie Nielsen flex some of his airplane deadpan skills and helps continue the horror parody subgenre, which would become much more popular in the following year thanks to Student Bodies, this film, and Saturday the 14th from this year. Besides the alien-bended horror films, we have some more science fiction and science run-amok films, with of course Cronenberg's Scanners, which at times feels part Stephen King, part X-Men, but still very much Cronenberg. There's also the slasher/mad scientist hybrid Strange Behavior, which sports some great kills and a great dance party. This isn't the only mad scientist film of the year. The great Dr. Freudstein is one of the scariest villains in Fulci's filmography. Another one that fits in with the end of the world as well as science fiction is the miniseries Day of the Trippids, which not only shows us flesh-eating plants, but illness run rampant and a threat from beyond the stars. School in the Crosshairs is strictly more science fiction than horror, but its director and its strange plot make it worth watching for horror fans. Visitors from the Arcana Galaxy feels planned in the science fiction genre until a toy monster comes to life and attacks a dinner party in almost absurdist nightmare. One would be mistaken to leave out Jackie Kong's The Bean, about a mutated creature living in a junkyard. This low-budget romp features one of the only Easter horror set pieces, with the exception, of course, of Critters 2. Speaking of monsters, not quite brought on by toxic waste or science gone wrong, we have The Boogans, which is more in line with subterranean horror. Zombies and cannibals didn't quite show up like last year, but there were a few. Although most much more unorthodox than the traditional Romero or Fulci-style zombies, with the exception of A Monstrous Corpse, the remake of Let Sleeping Corpses Lie, which I've mentioned numerous times already. Although Fulci did a feature film with zombies this year, I don't think anyone would call the zombies from the Beyond your typical gut munchers. Similar zombies appear in the films Fear No Evil and Kung Fu Zombie, where they are either brought back by demonic force or magic. We also have 2 from the infamous Nazi zombie subgenre, Night of the Zombies with porn star Jamie Gillis, and the previously mentioned John Roland movie, Zombie Lake, which features more sex and nudity than the former, which is surprising with who the star is. As for the strange film Leech Wizard, it seems to take a page out of the Cronenberg-style zombie, in the style of Shivers. The weird thinking crypt-like zombies from Burial Ground do share plenty of DNA with the shambling creatures from Fulci Zombie, but they also feature a certain motivation of evil in the vein of Tombs of the Blind Dead. Their disfigured and awfully poorly thought-out facial features create a bizarre group of beasts. Not quite zombies, but the end would suggest they are much more that than the title suggests what they are, Dawn of the Mummy. The final zombie film, worth noting, is one that follows more of a mystical, magic, and science approach, mixing the 3 into a strange world of voodoo and reincarnation, Dead and Buried. It not only stands out in that aspect, but in nearly every department, from casting, script, soundtrack, and atmosphere. As for the fellow flesh tasters of the horror genre, we have the final nail in the coffin of the Italian cannibal film. A few would come in later, but this one stands to be the last real mean one, with some of the most extreme gore around. The film in question, of course, is Cannibal Ferox, aka Make Them Die Slowly, starring Italy's whipping boy Giovanni Lamberto Radici, this time as a drug-fueled maniac. A lot of films walk the line of horror and thriller, many of which focus on characters with a sick mind. These films are about obsession, stalking, mental illness, and often at times they cross into the horror genre, many of which are slashers, but many sort of fit into their own little genres. Nightmares in a Damaged Brain has a subgenre in the alternate title, although this one does eventually turn into a slasher film and is squarely in the horror genre due to his excessive gore and mean spirit. We do have a lot of psychological focus here on our killer George. Throughout the entire film, we are given glimpses of his past trauma, until eventually we witness his breaking point. The Fan and Tattoo are two films that follow two dangerous men, who aren't always killers, but are very capable of it. The two performances in the films, by Michael Biehn in The Fan and Bruce Dern in Tattoo, are well done and seem to come from a place of realism more than some of the slasher films of the year. The Filipino film, Kizamata, is a devastatingly dark family drama about the controlling and ugly nature of a father. The claustrophobia the film protrudes is enough to make anyone feel the true horror of being trapped. Eyes of a Stranger, which is sort of one of the two takes on the Rear Window plot device, the other being Road Games. Eyes of a Stranger follows a reporter who believes an apartment neighbor may be a serial killer and gets involved trying to figure out how to stop him. Of course, she puts her life in danger as well as her younger disabled sister, who has suffered from previous trauma. The film seems to follow the killer a little bit more than usual and doesn't hide his identity. The glimpses at him are rather unpleasant, add a layer of sleaze. The Hong Kong film Love Massacre seems to take a page right out of the Richard Speck murders towards the end of the film. We literally watch what seems to be a charming character become more unhinged as tragedy strikes. But after each layer is removed, we begin to see who he really is, until the violent climax. Delusion follows a live-in nurse who is surrounded by mental illness from nearly every character in the film, and may even suffer from it herself. Madhouse, although pretty firmly in the slasher genre, it focuses on a pair of twins, one of which resides in a mental hospital with a chronic illness, and the other half is having her friends targeted by a mad slasher. Of course, all signs point to one thing, but by the end of the film, we realize maybe this problem runs a little deeper in the family line. This 45 is one of the quintessential rape revenge films ever made. Directed by legend Abel Ferreira, a young mute girl is raped 2 times in one day and snaps. At first, she kills her rapist, but before long, she is killing every man she comes into contact with. Watching an innocent character played by Zoe Lund turn into a vicious killer is equal parts satisfying and unnerving. When Lund encounters a distraught man in the park, the film reaches its darkest moment. As for the ultimate sick mind performance, besides maybe Ajani and Neo from Possession, we have Susan Tyrrell and Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker. This is one for the books. The film itself is a very well thought out and acted film. Although fairly straightforward in its filmmaking techniques, it doesn't stop the film from having many untypical subject matters that are often not taken seriously, and they're taken seriously here, including incest, homosexuality, and police brutality. Tyrell plays an incredibly scary and tragic character in this that has intensity towards the end of the film that only she could manage. There's always going to be a crossover for horror fans, where a lot of people think that something is horror enough, or the director is from a horror background, so it gets lumped in. Maybe sometimes something is so intense or violent that no other genre would consider taking the film. But here's a list of films that were watched that could have some appeal to the horror crowd. Brian De Palma walked the line with his film Dressed to Kill last year, and he does it again with his take on Blowout. An amazing film that has some horror tendencies but sits more firmly in the thriller category. John Carpenter is of course no stranger to the horror genre, but right in the middle of his horror run, he has this little dystopian film with an amazing genre cast, Escape from New York, which at times looks and feels like a horror film, but never quite crosses over. Shock Treatment, the follow-up to the Rocky Horror Picture Show, is a wonderfully funny and clever musical, predicting reality TV, but is even less of a horror film than its predecessor. Looker by Michael Crichton, I think, comes closest here. The murders carried out in the beginning of the film feel much like a giallo, but as the film goes on, we move away from the slasher/giallo genre and land firmly into the science fiction thriller world. Films like Mommy Dearest have been compared to horror films, but sometimes they fit more into the cult world, and that crossover is fairly large. I would say the same thing goes for John Waters' Polyester, which is an amazing film that has a few horror tendencies, but again sort of sits in the world of cult only. When you look at some of the Hong Kong films, they cross the line on so many points in terms of ruthless villains who rape and murder with glee, but their focus again is more firmly in action, drama, and exploitation, such as Man on the Brink, Mob Flicks Patrol, Murders Pursue, and Cold-Blooded Murder. When we talk straight-up exploitation, one that stands out this year is Mad Foxes, which ended up on the Section 3 video nasty list for a reason. Although everything is done in such a ridiculous way that it's hard to take the film too seriously, it's a bonkers exploitation movie regardless. Speaking of more exploitation films, there's always the ones that dip more into the sexploitation subgenre, like Caligula and Messalina, Divine Emmanuel, and Sex is Crazy. The first two of these don't shy away from murder and violence, but none of these quite go far enough to be considered horror. When we get to action thrillers such as the survival film Southern Comfort, I could see someone feeling this one is horror enough due to the picking them off nature and the downbeat tone. But stuff like Nighthawks is more firmly in the action thriller category. Being featured on the Terror in the Isles compilation sort of pushed this towards the horror genre. The film Sphinx, location and plot seem to make it more of a horror film, being focused on the Egyptian artifacts and culture, but it's a fairly standard mystery thriller. Finally, some films that belong in the fantasy genre, but do feature monsters and some scary moments. These include Clash of the Titans. The Medusa scene in particular could have people move this to the horror genre. Lastly, Thrilling Bloody Sword, which features tons of magic, monsters, and fantasy. Most of these I think are pretty clear-cut to myself, but I do see a couple that could be considered by some to be horror films. A few shockumentaries were released in 1981, the standout being The Killing of America, which seems to actually have something more to say than just shock the audience. Although it does that as well, with its real-life depictions of assassinations and violent crime. Well, faces of death too. Instead of following suit of the first film and being mostly created footage, it's mostly real this time, and seems far too broad a subject to really do much of anything except wear out its welcome quickly. Great White Death focuses on sharks, but manages to go into stingrays and other things. The narration of Glenn Ford helps, but not enough to make it interesting. There's a handful of oddball titles that they don't really fit anywhere with the subgenres or countries mentioned, but are worth noting. Tracking, which I believe is wrongly listed as an 81 film, is a bizarre one, about a group of women being assaulted by an invisible assailant. The Territory is a survival horror film about a group of annoying lost hikers who begin to turn on each other and end up dead when their guide suffers an awful fate. Bloody Sex is a Spanish giallo where a woman gets stranded at a villa with an older woman and a helper. It's packed with sex and nudity, and there's a solid mystery behind it. Again, we should mention that many of these films didn't go unpunished, at least in the UK, for their scenes of violence, sex, and gore. Here's a list of 16 films that ended up on the Video Nasties list, deserved or not. Absurd, The Beyond, Bloody Moon, The Burning, Cannibal Ferox, Dead and Buried, Don't Go Into the Woods, Alone, The Evil Dead, Evil Speak, The Fun House, The House by the Cemetery, Madhouse, Butcher Baker, Nightmare Maker, Nightmare, Possession, and Night School. There are numerous shorts from this year, some that cover Lovecraft, others made by the Sam Raimi camp, while some are just downright weird attempts at purgatory, mental illness, and carnivorous grass, and of course surreal nightmares. When trying to watch as many horror films from a certain year, there's always going to be a few films that aren't English friendly, or not available here. Here's a short list of films that could be of interest if ever released. Evil Under the Moon, Act of Violence, Sweating Soil, Sonata, Parano, or Fear, The Shot, The Capilla Ardente, Living Soul and Dead Body, Office Lady, Rope Slave, The Haunted House, and From the Old Earth. Before we get into the top horror films of the year, let's take a look at some of the best horror-adjacent films of the year. Southern Comfort, a great survival film, sporting an amazing cast. The setting, the music, and the final scenes really bring this one together.
Are we supposed to say thanks? You're not supposed to say nothing, soldier.
Looker. The ideas in Looker are way ahead of their time. In fact, they are brilliant. The movie doesn't quite work 100% towards the end, but that doesn't stop it from being a completely engaging and interesting film. Escape from New York, one of the best genre cast of all time. Snake is one of the quintessential anti-heroes ever. The style is 100% Carpenter from the music to the cinematography. Blowout, a great follow-up to Dressed to Kill, with an amazing cast and a shockingly downbeat ending. Polyester. To know good bad taste, you must know good taste. No one has ever done that style better than John Waters. Bizarre look at a mutated family dynamic. Feels part like satire on Lifetime movies. Completely brilliant. Shock Treatment. Sporting some of the same fantastic cast from the Rocky Horror Picture Show. Believe it or not, this musical satire comedy has some of the catchiest and prophetic lyrics ever.
And I'm the stubble on your chin, you're no good. You're no good. You've got dirt on your hands and everybody understands you're no good. You're no good. Oh, what a joke. What a joke. You feel like like choking. You play for broke. He leaves you smoking. Oh, romance is not a children's game, but you keep going back. It's driving you insane.
Miss 45. One of the quintessential rape revenge films, Abel Ferrara's gritty style is perfect for the subgenre. Zoe Lund's performance is one of the saddest yet scariest of the year. The ending party scene in slow motion is stress-inducing. When Lund finally realizes who brings her death, the pain in her eyes shows how mentally ill she has become. 1981 is such a strong year, even the notable snubs I consider very good horror films. Just not my favorites of the year, but I feel like they are still impactful, popular, and entertaining enough to mention. It was very hard to limit this list to 10. Let's see if I can do it. Road Games. Well-directed and acted Hitchcockian thriller horror. Great performances by Stacy Keach and Jamie Lee Curtis. Their back and forth seems really genuine. Deadly Blessing. Master of horror Wes Craven turned in an interesting horror film with a solid cast including Sharon Stone, regular Michael Berryman, and Ernest Borgnine. The not quite Amish background and the ending really made for a unique viewing experience. Final Conflict, The Omen 3. A solid conclusion to the Omen storyline. The high production cost and deaths are really great, and really over the top. Hell Night. A really fun slasher with a good setup and great location. Bloody Moon. One of Jess Franco's most approachable films, even if it is still a super weird gothic slasher incestuous hybrid. Also, the soundtrack is stellar. Strange Behavior. Super interesting mad scientist slasher hybrid, with a good reveal and some really solid and nasty kills. It's a bit obvious that this Australian, New Zealand, UK co-production isn't filmed in small town America though. Ghost Story. A great cast of distinguished gentlemen keep your attention throughout. A bit slow in parts, but well worth your time. The Boogans. Some decent looking monsters and a nice small town feel make the Boogans worth watching, although the pacing is a bit off. The Bean. Jackie Kong's directorial debut is a fun one, although the budget does show at times in the constant changing of night and day between scenes. Overall, it's a solid little monster flick about toxic waste. Wolfen. One of the best directed films of the year, with some great point of view camera work and some really solid suspense. Finney is great as usual. Before we get into the top 25, I had a really hard time breaking it down to just that, so there are so many movies that I feel are worth an honorable mention, so here we go. Night School, an adult-oriented slasher where the killer's MO and design stand out. The scene in the diner is one of the best wait-for-it scenes of the year. Just Before Dawn, one of the best slashers to use the forest backdrop as a dangerous component. The backwoods characters and creepy twin dynamic help the film stand out, not to mention a really cool genre cast. Venom, a great thriller with a killer animal dynamic, pits a group of kidnappers trapped with a black mamba. Oliver Reed and Klaus Kinski are at each other's throats on screen and behind the scenes. A very well-made horror thriller, but a huge part thriller, hence why it's missing out on the top 25. Queen of Black Magic, an interesting tale of revenge, filled with bizarre kills and a nice twist, which of course ends with a black magic showdown. Mystics in Bali. Never make a deal with a witch, or otherwise you might become a floating head that needs blood from some rather unusual places. Completely insane and entertaining film that could be only from Indonesia. Day of the Triffids. Being a TV miniseries, I felt was strong enough reason to leave off the spectacular post-apocalyptic tale about a meteor that blinds nearly the entire population, which lets a genetically modified cannibalistic plant take over the world. Yeah, crazy stuff. Eyes of a Stranger, a slasher version of Rear Window with an incredibly creepy killer and some solid kills. Wolf Hour, a very cerebral and subtle werewolf film about a married man who brings in a woman to help him study wolves. The wife begins to suspect that there is something a bit off about the stranger. Is it jealousy or something else? The Incubus. John Cassavetes and John Ireland star in this violent and nasty tale about an incubus who not only kills its victims, but sexually assaults them as well. Very well acted and directed. Madman, a great regional horror film that takes some inspiration from the Cropsey legend. The killer Madman Mars is very memorable, as is his theme music. Solid kills and a good atmosphere put this one above a lot of its contemporaries in the slasher genre. The Prowler. Savini effects and mean-spirited kills really make The Prowler stand out. Some would argue that this is Savini's finest gore effects. In terms of slashers, The Final Girl is a little underappreciated as well. Student Bodies. A ridiculously stupid parody in the vein of Airplane that spoofs slasher films. Not all the jokes land, but there are so many that it's hard not to get a couple genuine laughs from it.
With rape and violence rampant in this land, with human flesh cheapened and vulgarized, one of the last bastions of decency is the gentle satisfaction one gains from making a horsehead bookend.
Bloody Birthday. One of the more fun killer kids films. A trio of kids are born the same day on a solar eclipse. The result is that all three of the children are psychopathic killers. Ed Hunt does a solid job with his good mixture of bad seed and the Village of the Damned. The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Miss Osborne. A highly sexualized and disturbing look at Dr. Jekyll, where our poor doctor turns into a sex maniac with a very sharp instrument. A really solid cast and dreamlike look really helped this one stand out and be something different. Bewitched. The Shaw brothers deliver a great film about a truly nasty curse. Not only does it end in typical fashion with a magical battle, but it shows several different curses in gory detail. Corpse Mania. A great giallo-style Shaw brothers flick that doesn't shy away from the taboo nature of necrophilia. There's a certain haze over the film, but due to the graphic nature, that might be for the best, complete with Fulci-style maggots. Number 25.
The following feature is one of the most violent films ever made. There are at least 24 scenes of barbaric torture and sadistic cruelty graphically shown. If the presentation of disgusting and repulsive subject matter upsets you, please do not view this film. Make them die slowly.
One of the last great gross-out cannibal films, Umberto Lenzi tries to outdo his contemporary in Ruggero Deodato with some truly insane scenes. Lorraine DeSalle decides to travel to an isolated location to prove that cannibalism is a myth, and when she runs into Giovanni Lamberto Radici and his accomplice, she realizes she was wrong. What follows is real animal killings, castration, and a woman getting her breast pierced by hooks. Remember the Red River Valley.
Oh, I miss your bright eyes and sweet smile. And I know you'll be taking the sunshine that has brightened our path for a while. Come and sit by my side till you're leaving. And remember the Red River Valley and the cowboy that had loved you so true.
24.
We need each other. We are bound together by hatred. He wants to kill me.
But he's only a cat.
A cat that sooner or later will kill me.
The Black Cat. Fulci dabbles with Poe. During Fulci's heyday of gore, this one isn't quite as gory, but the top-notch score and English Town make it feel like a Lost Hammer classic. The score by Pino Donaggio is one of the best of the year. A really solid cast including Fulci two-timer, Warbeck, Mimsy Farmer, and Patrick McGee also helped bring this one together.
Perhaps we hold possibilities within ourselves we are not aware of. Powers we ourselves don't understand.
Maybe we don't want to, because we're terrified.
I have such powers, and I'm not terrified.
Galaxy of Terror. just been relocated.
Roger Corman was clearly cashing in on the success of Alien with this gory and sleazy knockoff. A ship filled with familiar faces are answering a distress call on a strange planet. Soon enough, the group of character actors, including Sid Haig, Robert Englund, Grace Sabinski, and Ray Walston, begin to get picked off by their biggest fears, which includes crystals, monsters, and rape slugs. The ending of the film is a bit of a letdown, but the lead up is so fast-paced and crazy it's hard not to enjoy.
What are the odds of us getting out of here?
What are the odds? We lose.
Stranded astronauts Edward Albert and Aaron Moran battle hordes of hideous shadow demons, encounter the razor-sharp living glass, brave the pit of doomed souls, just to discover the only way out is death. Galaxy of Terror. The ultimate horror in space.
22.
Because of the bizarre nature of this birthday party, no one will be seated during the last 10 minutes of Happy Birthday to Me. Pray you're not invited.
Happy Birthday to Me. A lot more influential than it gets credit for, Happy Birthday to Me follows a story of the Elite 10, a group of students who come from all the best families. When they start getting picked off, it's a mystery who is doing it. With some fun, clever kills, including the poster kill, of course, and a couple bonkers reveals, this one is entertaining, even with the long runtime.
Happy birthday to me.
21.
I shot him 6 times! I shot him in the heart! This man, he's not human!
Universal Pictures presents Halloween 2. More of the night he came home.
Picking up where the first film left off, we have an unhinged Loomis running around the streets looking for Michael Myers, while we see Michael Myers' POV stalking. This happens to be some of the best stuff in the film. Eventually, the film ends up in a hospital, where the cast is picked off by our slasher in much gorier detail than the first film. Look out for one of the best burn stunts of the year.
I've been trigger-treated to death tonight. You don't know what death is.
20.
Mind force. Scanners. Their thoughts can kill.
Within the first 15 minutes, Scanners has to make a top list with one of the best head explosions of all time. An interesting science fiction horror film that requires a bit of thinking and some patience, but it pays off with one of the best villains of the year, played by Michael Ironside, and 2 show-stopping scenes. 19.
It's undoubtedly the most valuable piece in my collection.
And now we've discovered the graves of the Bartori family. Of Artfos, her most faithful servant. Of Valdemar Daninsky, the lycanthrope.
Night of the Werewolf. Paul Naschy not only stars but directs this remake of one of his early werewolf films. The story feels like a classic Hammer or Italian horror film, where we have a classic monster mash of werewolves, vampires, and more. The effects and nudity are cranked up to fit in the 80s, and everything else is wonderfully vintage. $18.
The Funhouse
Coming soon from Universal Pictures, The Funhouse. It's a carnival of terror from Tobe Hooper, the director who terrified you with the Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Tobe Hooper packed in as much universal iconography as he could here. When a group of teens see something they shouldn't at a traveling carnival, they have to fight for their lives against a carnival barker and his extremely deformed son. Hooper really carries the carnival setting perfect. The villains are scary, but their motives are understood, and there isn't a much better backdrop for a horror film than a carnival. 17.
Nightmare. The motion picture everyone is talking about.
Hello? Hello, Steve?
Nightmare.
Kathy? Kathy?
Starting in a similar vein to Maniac and ending a bit like Halloween, although not quite as good as either, Nightmare still managed to pack some good gore, a great final reveal of our killer's trauma, and a couple really disturbing kills.
Nightmare. Nightmare. The dream you can't escape. Alive. No one under 17 will be admitted. From 21st Century Distribution, coming soon.
Number 16.
Evil speak. Remember that little kid you used to pick on? Well, he's a big boy now.
Clint Howard is an orphan bullied kid at a military school. Soon enough, he makes a pact with Satan for revenge. The results are man-eating pigs, floating cadets with broadswords, and some head-splitting mayhem. A group of great character actors help move this one along.
Imbue these creatures with your strength and force. Let them avenge me.
15.
Help me get out of here. We can start over. Just the two of us.
Our party is just beginning. You can't leave yet.
You're not still afraid of her after all these years? The stories you used to tell.
They were not stories.
And you're frightened? What of?
On our birthdays, she had this special ceremony.
Soon it will be our birthday again. Remember how we used to celebrate, sister dear?
No.
Remember what I did? How it hurt? Huh? I will make it hurt again. I'll make you suffer what I've suffered. Run! You'll never get away from me.
Madhouse. A killer dog, an evil sister, and some murdered children. Madhouse is a wild ride, with a few gory kills and a great score by Riz Ortolani, some of which is very familiar to fans of Cannibal Holocaust. It also has enough gore to put it on the video nasties list.
Dog. Good boy.
Number 14.
The Howling.
Shot in a strange soft focus that immediately gives off a dreamlike quality, we have the second best werewolf movie of the year, and one of the best overall. One of the best cast of its type helped this one stand out. Director Joe Dante, being a clear fan of classic actors, decided to riddle the entire film with them. From Dick Miller to Slim Pickens to John Carradine and Patrick Macnee, we have a lot of talent in front and behind the camera. And star Dee Wallace is a bit underappreciated as a scream queen when you look at her vast body of work. Number 13. Burial Ground. Equal parts cheesy, sleazy, creepy, and absurd. Burial Ground has so many what the fuck moments that the entire thing feels like some sort of nightmare. The zombies are creepy, the score gives a weird disjointed feeling, and the finale is one no one will ever forget. Number 12.
Take your pick. My Bloody Valentine.
A wonderful small town feel and great holiday gimmick, as well as solid characters and location, have kept this one at the top of the best slasher list for a long time. The kills are great in their uncut form, as is the pacing. Number 11.
So shocking, so terrifying, so powerful. Night Warning has been named Best Horror Film of the Year by the Academy of Science Fiction, Fantasy, and Horror. Billy and Julie, young, innocent, in love. It was all a mistake.
Butcher, Baker, Nightmare Maker. When a young man is destined to go off to college, his caretaking aunt begins to completely snap. Butcher Baker tackles a lot of issues that are normally made more exploitative or comedic at the time, but manages to handle them very seriously and to an extent with sympathy. Susan Tyrell is excellent in the film, as is Bo Sevson as a crooked cop. The end of the film turns it to more of a slasher, but the film remains interesting the entire time.
And your wrist, keep it limp-like. That shouldn't be too difficult for you.
Number 10, The Pit. A complete what the fuck movie if there ever was one. Based off a book called Teddy about a mentally ill child, the film decides to take liberties with the story, and the result is a killer kid movie, a talking stuffed animal movie, and a man-eating troglodyte story. So in other words, a great film.
Girls.
Now don't let that little perv get to you.
Miss Livingston. Yes, you know. Oh, Miss Livingston.
Pretty awful mess. What's left of her?
Number 9.
The day you count on for terror is not over. Friday the 13th. Part 2.
Steve Miner directs a sequel to the smash hit Friday the 13th. Not only does he continue the formula, he managed to do it better, with better suspense and characters. The only negative here is that a lot of the gore was cut out by the MPAA. That still doesn't stop it from being one of the scariest of the entire franchise. Plus, it introduces Jason as the killer.
night on the CBS Saturday Night Movies, this gentleman saved this little girl's life, but they accused him of harming her.
We'll do this ourselves.
And he was tragically murdered. Now, one by one, the men of this town are dying. Who is his avenger? Is it the dead man's grief-stricken mother?
They killed my boy!
The little girl who loved him?
I know what you did to Bava.
Or could it be the Scarecrow? Dark Night of the Scarecrow, coming up next.
One of the best, if not the best, TV horror film ever made, featuring a tragic tale of murder and revenge in a small town, proving that gore isn't needed to be an effective horror film. Charles During, Larry Drake, and Claude Earl Jones shine in this strange slasher film about a scarecrow that seems to appear whenever someone dies.
I didn't tell you anything. Bubba's dead.
I know.
We killed him!
Don't worry, Mrs. Ritter. Bubba's not gone. He's just being silly. Don't you know what he's doing? He's playing the hiding game.
Number 7.
In the house by the cemetery, what you don't know will hurt you. He has been awaiting the arrival of his new guests. One by one, they are disappearing. Before you get locked into this house or read the fine print, you may have just mortgaged your life. House by the cemetery. No one under 17 will be admitted.
The second time Lucio Fulci appears on this list. Again, made during his heyday of gore films, this one feels like one of the closest to Lovecraft, featuring one of his scariest killers, a Dr. Freudstein, a cross between, of course, Sigmund Freud and Frankenstein. This killer not only murders children, but uses their parts to keep himself alive. A good cast, score, and kills help this one, but so does the weird small-town haunting feel, as well as the gothic atmosphere. Number 6.
What happened one summer 5 years ago is about to happen again, and again, and again. The Burning.
Again, based on the urban legend of Cropsey, we have a former groundskeeper who hacks up children of a summer camp for revenge. Savini delivers on some great FX, while Rick Wakeman turns in one of the best scores of the year. The key to a great slasher is not only found in the kills, but the characters, and here we have some really solid, memorable ones, played by some standouts in Jace Alexander, Fisher Stevens, Ned Eisenberg, and Larry Joshua. Number 5. The Evil Dead. Sam Raimi's ingenuity on a budget inspired many indie directors to pick up the camera themselves and make gore-soaked, do-it-yourself films. The Evil Dead stands as one of the first and best splatter films around.
Why have you disturbed our sleep, awakened us from our ancient slumber?
Number 4.
When you die in Potter's Bluff, expect the unexpected. From the creators of Alien, Dead and Buried. It will take your breath away. All of it. Dead and Buried.
Dead and Buried. One of the most underrated horror films ever made, as well as being a completely unique take on the zombie film. Dead and Buried is Gary Sherman's masterwork. featuring thick atmosphere and amazingly shocking ending. The only thing about it more shocking is how underseen it seems to be. Number 3.
Did you hear that? I heard that. What was it? Could be a lot of things. Yeah? A coyote. There aren't any coyotes in England.
I'm sorry I'm upsetting you, David, but you don't understand what's going on.
I understand, all right. You're one of the undead, and I'm a werewolf.
Yes, that's right.
An American Werewolf in London. An Amazing Werewolf transformation is probably the highlight by many, but American Werewolf in London has plenty to offer, from its witty dialogue and likable characters to its unique yet familiar take on the werewolf mythos. Number 2.
Ugly. You've hardened. For the first time, you look vulgar to me.
You are not different from anyone else. We are all the same, but in different words, different bodies, different versions. Like insects, meat.
What is it?
Possession. The ultimate breakup movie. Isabella, Johnny, and Sam Neill feel like they're putting each other through hell. From the bleak backdrop of the Berlin Wall to the menacing portrayal of an awful relationship, Possession is one of the wildest and weirdest art films ever made. Number 1.
Who else is here?
There's nobody here.
I can feel a presence. Somebody else is in here.
Oh, some weird story that Emily told me about room 36.
Emily? Who's Emily?
The blind girl that lives in the old house by the crossroads.
Crossroads.
Yes!
That house has been abandoned for the last 50 years.
But that's not true. It's not possible. I was there.
This house was constructed on one of the... Woe be unto him who opens one of the 7 gateways to hell, because through that gateway, evil will invade the world.
The Beyond. One of the greatest representations of nightmare logic on screen. Warbeck and McCall are excellent, filled to the brim with all the stuff that made Fulci an interesting and infamous director, from small-minded folks to gore-soaked set pieces. Worst of the year. Night of Horror. I am pretty sure this movie is made to show the Civil War reenactment footage they got. The exposition dumps are painful, as are the limited camera setups. Frankenstein Island. John Carradine is a floating head. That's about it. Saturday the 14th. Completely unfunny horror spoof. The humans are actually more unsettling than the goofy monsters. I've heard many experts say the reason Abbott Costello Meet Frankenstein works is because the monsters are played straight and scary. This is the opposite. Night of the Zombies. Very boring Nazi spy zombie film with Jamie Gillis. The Midnight. Fairly inept and hard to follow Taiwanese horror film. Best special effects / gore. The Beyond. Giannotta De Rossi and Maurizio Trani. From exploding heads, acid burns, and flesh-eating tarantulas, there are some nasty effects that have De Rossi's signature style. An American Werewolf in London. Rick Baker and team pretty much create the werewolf transformation to beat. The Howling. Rob Bottin and crew do one of the best bipedal werewolves around. The House by the Cemetery. Tranny and DeRossi are at it again. Burial Ground. The zombies look like childhood nightmares come to life. The Prowler. The dark cinematography really gave the Savini effects a sense of snuff. Scanners. Of course the opening, but the end fight scene as well. Evil Dead. Do-it-yourself effects are not only charming, but equal parts funny and gross. Best kill of the year. The Beyond, Head Explosion, and Joe the Plumber. The Prowler, Head Explosion, Knife in the Head. Scanners, Head Explosion, Burial Ground. Friday the 13th Part 2, Wheelchair. Nightmares in a Damaged Brain. My Bloody Valentine. House by the Cemetery. The Burning, the rap scene. Best Villain, Jason Voorhees. Sackhead Jason is one of the creepiest portrayals of the killer. More human than future renditions, his reactions have a sense of realism to him. Michael Myers. The quiet killer reveals himself to be a bit more than mortal in this one. He's an unstoppable juggernaut, walking through glass doors and being set on fire. Madman Mars. Hulking and large, Madman Mars is creepy enough without the axe. The Miner. One of the best outfits and weapons of any killer of the year. The Prowler. In a similar fashion to the Miner, our killer chooses a pitchfork instead. The Dear John letter also gives him a great insight and reasoning. Dr. Freudstein. Any monster where the sound of crying children is heard wherever they go has got to make the list. Shrek. DeRossi and company sure piled on the makeup, making him a walking zombie clay pot, but he still manages to make him very effective. The Geek. And the Father from Funhouse. The deformed son and father are a twofer. Kevin Conway is great as the father and the other family members, but the Geek's design is what you'll remember after the Frankie mask falls off. Cropsy. Completely burned and sporting a pair of hedge clippers, Cropsy is a nightmare for any summer camp. Best cinematography. Possession. The camera work never seems to stop moving, creating a very unnerving and frantic feeling. Dead and Buried. Making sure there is just the right amount of atmosphere without overdoing it. A wonderful setting is film perfect. The Evil Dead. Do-it-yourself camera work at its finest. The entire film seems to be on hyperdrive. A lot of this is due to the crazy and unique ways that the shots were obtained. Best script. Wolf Hour. A great look about jealousy and paranoia. The story unfolds the right amount without ever over-explaining. Dead and Buried. One of the rare times where you can tell where the film is going and it's too perfect to be upset. An American Werewolf in London. The banter back and forth is all great, as are the side characters who manage to be very well developed and add great depth to the story. The finale of the film also knows when to deliver on the goods. Best Directed Film. An American Werewolf in London. An endlessly watchable film with perfect pacing and acting. The Beyond. When you are looking to capture a nightmare world, this might be one of the all-time best at it. Best Score Soundtrack. The Beyond. Fabio Frizzi contributes a score that actually makes you feel like the gates of hell are opening. House by the Cemetery. Walter Rosati gives a nice gothic touch to his score, perfectly helping with the haunted house storyline. American Werewolf in London. The choice of soundtrack is clever and completely fitting. The Burning. One of the best slasher scores ever done, and maybe the best synth music score. Halloween 2. Hard to deny the beefed up version of the original score. Madhouse. Riz Ortolani mixes in some cues from Cannibal Holocaust and some lullabies for a truly primitive and childishly creepy score. The Black Cat / The Howling. Pino Donaggio has a twofer here with two fairly different soundtracks from two fairly different movies. Best Supporting Actor, Actress. Fiona Lewis for Strange Behavior. Fiona Lewis always seemed to demand a certain sense of respect about her, even when she's playing an evil person.
Could you be a little more specific, please?
Well, we're going to do an experiment on the chemical reaction of the limbic system. Could you look this way, please?
What are those needles for? What are you sticking me with?
Yesterday we worked on your memory. Today we're going to work on your motor responses.
Like that chicken in the classroom?
In a way, yes.
No fucking way, lady. I'm not doing this shit.
Now, Pete, just relax.
Forget. Oh, come on,
just
please,
relax.
please. Listen, I won't tell anybody.
I really,
please.
You won't remember a thing,
please.
really.
Just let me go!
Walt Gorney, Crazy Ralph. Friday the 13th Part 2. One of the greatest, if not the greatest, red herring doomsayers of all time. Returning from the first film, Walt Gorney is back to his old tricks.
Paul, there's something I think I should tell you.
Ernest Borgnine, Escape from New York. One of the best character actors to ever do it. Not only does he play the lovable cabbie in Escape, but also the evil patriarch in Deadly Blessing. The only actor to work with Carpenter and Craven this year. John Lithgow, Blow Up. Lithgow plays such a cold-hearted, matter-of-fact assassin who clearly enjoys his job too much. Charles Durning, Dark Knight of the Scarecrow. A complete and utter creep. Durning manages to play the world's most evil mailman with some obvious underlining issues of his own.
If I ever find a single shred of evidence, I'll see every one of you on death row. Am I keeping you, Mr. Hazelrig?
Huh? Oh, well, I was just noticing the time. It's Tuesday, and Mrs. Bunch will be having fried chicken over at the boarding house where I live.
Larry Drake, Dark Knight of the Scarecrow. Playing a slow man, Larry Drake does a good job being completely sympathetic and childish. John Carradine, The Howling. One of the last great roles Carradine got to play, and the only time he played a werewolf. Griffin Dunne, An American Werewolf in London. The best comic timing of the year. Griffin Dunne and Knowlton are great, and great together. All their back and forth seems incredibly real.
Well, I like it here. Right. Northern England first, Italy later. Right. I mean, we've got 3 months. Right.
Jack Albertson, Dead and Buried. His only horror role, and Grandpa Joe sure knocked it out of the park as the creepy mastermind mortician who not only turns people into zombies, but creates an entire town of them. Michael Ironside, Scanners. A truly menacing villain, Ironside did the role so good he'd play villains for the next 25 years. Nobody will ever be able to replace Daryl Revick.
Like Revick! Daryl Revick!
No. Like him. It's as though he's been reincarnated in you.
You're not listening to me. You're not cooperating, Cam. You're not cooperating with me at all. I've been counting on you for years, Cam. Tell me you're not going to betray me like all the rest. you think you are is going to become me. You're going to be with me, Cameron, no matter what. After all, brothers should be close, don't you think?
Best Actress, Susan Tyrrell, Butcher Baker, Nightmare Maker. Susan Tyrrell in one of the most unhinged, incestuous, creepy roles ever. It takes a special actress to go this over the top and seem like a human. She nails it.
I'll be back.
Zoe Lund, Miss 45. A perfect performance and completely mute. From the style, outfits, and the way she shoots her gun, it's all around amazing.
Didn't I tell you to trust me? I mean, isn't this a beautiful place?
Isabella Adjani, Possession. This might be the best performance of the year. Haunting, horrifying, and the best meltdown ever. Jenny Agutter, An American Werewolf in London. Warm, funny, and jovial. I think anyone would fall in love with her within a few days.
Let me help you. I love you, David.
Elizabeth Stepanek, No Mercy, No Future. A really unnerving performance. Elizabeth Stepanek plays a mentally disturbed woman who within a short period of time goes through some of the most grueling things film can offer. Katrina McCall, The Beyond and House by the Cemetery. Two very different performances here. One a bit more standard, afraid mother, done well, but her role in The Beyond as a would-be hotel owner is the biggest standout. Always classy, and the end scene is heartbreaking.
My nerves are fine the way they are.
Amy Steele, Friday the 13th Part 2. Considered to be the best final girl of the series, her resourcefulness and level-headedness are convincingly brought to life by Steele.
That's a good boy. Good Jason.
Jessica Harper, Shot Creek. Always charming, and with an excellent voice.
Then you go snip, snip, snip. Then you're whipping a zip, zip, zip. Split it up to the hip, hip, hip. And as you strip, strip, strip. Oh, you quiver, shiver. For that soft caress as you slip, slip, slip. Into that little black dress. That's minimal. Little black dress. Let's face it.
Best Actor, Vic Selayan, Kizamata. This is one of the most despicable and controlling characters ever committed to celluloid. As awful as Vic is in the film, he has a great screen presence and charisma.
Kaya mag-good time kayo. Ba't di kayo lumabas? Lalabas nga ako kami.
Divine, Polyester. One of the funniest roles of the year, Divine plays a trapped and neglected mother who turns to alcohol in such a beautiful and over-the-top way.
Kirk, I'm as upset as you to learn of Dexter's truancy, but surely expulsion is not the answer.
I'm afraid expulsion is the only answer. It is the opinion of the entire staff that Dexter is criminally insane and hazards the safety of the other students. We have no choice. I'm sorry. Good day,
Hello,
Mrs. Fisher.
Mr. Kirk.
Sam Neill, Possession. Up there with his co-star Johnny, Neil is truly unhinged and completely dangerous. Donald Pleasance, Halloween 2, Escape from New York. Pleasance goes a bit over the top in the sequel to Halloween, but it works to the film's advantage. All the highlights include Loomis running around the street like a madman. For good measure, he also plays the President of the United States in Escape from New York.
Duke!
Kurt Russell, Escape from New York. The quintessential anti-hero, tough, mean, and straightforward.
I'm too tired. Maybe later.
I've got another deal for you. I want you to think it over while you're resting. I want to give you a job. We'd make one hell of a team, Snake.
The name's Pliskin.
David Warbeck, The Beyond. Warbeck shows why he should have been a hero-leading type in this Fulci classic. When Warbeck realizes where he is at the end of the film, and his brow goes up slightly, it's acted to perfection. Since this is the year of the slasher, I figured why not include my ranking of the movies I consider slashers from the year, starting from 30 to 1. 30, Wolf, aka Stricklotta. 29, Scream. 28, Home Sweet Home. 27, Don't Go in the Woods, Alone. 26, The Fan. 25, Deadly Blessing. 24, Graduation Day. 23, Hospital Massacre. 22, Strange Behavior. 21, Student Bodies. 20, Bloody Moon. 19, Final Exam. 18, Absurd, aka Anthropophagus 2, aka Horrible. 17, Hell Night. 16, Bloody Birthday. 15, Madman. 14, The Prowler. 13, Eyes of a Stranger. 12, Just Before Dawn. 11, Night School. 10, Happy Birthday to Me. 9, Halloween 2. 8, The Fun House. 7, Nightmares, aka Nightmares in a Damaged Brain. 6, Madhouse. 5, My Bloody Valentine. 4, Butcher Baker Nightmare Maker, aka Night Warning. 3, Friday 13th Part 2. 2, Dark Night of the Scarecrow. And 1, The Burning. Before we get into our dedications, I would like to touch on how many classic actors turned to horror after being forgotten by the mainstream. Often these actors would become mainstays in the genre until their untimely deaths. Some would manage to do several horror films a year. The quality always wasn't there in the films, but their presence was always welcome. Donald Pleasance, after having been in so many classic films, including many horror films, had a great success playing Dr. Loomis in Halloween. This, of course, landed him in the role in the sequel, as well as the role in Carpenter's Escape from New York and The Monster Club, alongside genre faves Vincent Price, Patrick McGee, and John Carradine. No one was quite as busy as John Carradine in 1981. Some of his roles begged for more. I'm looking at you, Frankenstein Island. He turned up decent performances in The Nesting and Monster Club, but his true standout of the year would be The Howling, where he gets a chance to play a werewolf with shot teeth. This would be the last year that Joseph Cotten would act, although he lived many years after. Of course, both films he did being horror, The Survivor and Delusion. Not his finest performance, but always enjoyable. Patrick McGee also did his last films in 1981, but managed to get 3 out before his death in 82. He portrays a ghoul in the finest segment in The Monster Club, as well as a general in The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Miss Osborne, and finally, as a madman who has a strange connection with a feline in Fulci's The Black Cat. So for the dedications, no one's going to be mentioned in more than one show. So if they're mentioned in a previous year, they will not be mentioned again. Jack Albertson, Roy Ward Baker, Oliver Reed, Zoe Lund, Jess Franco, Bruno Mattei, John Carradine, Donald Pleasance, Ernest Borgnine, Patrick McGee, Joseph Cotten, Larry Drake, Susan Tyrell, David Warbeck, Riz Ortolani, and Roger Corman. I want to do some thank yous for the people that contributed to the special videos. Art editor for Cannibal Ferox, House by the Cemetery, The Beyond, Burial Ground, and the special top 10 video.
Factory stickers, that's my chain from my hometown. They had 26 locations, I believe, in their peak, and they had everything. It wasn't like
Troy Howarth for The
Fulci
Black Cat,
had a lot
Venom,
of
The
respect for him.
Beyond,
He didn't
House
always
by the
respect
Cemetery,
actors,
and
but
the
he
special top
respected
10 video.
me, and he said, it wasn't easy working with him, but the results were absolutely worth it. So, part of me is kind of like, it would have been so fascinating to see super genteel, gentlemanly Peter Cushing in a Fulci movie.
Bruce
So that was
Holchak for
actually set
Burial
at the
Ground,
Palace
Halloween
Studios.
2, The Beyond, and the special top 10
And
video.
I think it's the only set of the movie. Possibly some of those underground art areas, like where the "Mama, this cloth smells of death." That may have been a set too. But definitely
Nathaniel Thompson for Halloween 2, The Beyond, and the special top 10 video.
Shot. I mean, things like the Rebecca Schaefer thing, Dominic Dunn. I mean, you had like all of a sudden that famous people were just getting killed for no reason by people they didn't even know.
Duncan McLeish for Possession and Scanners.
Movie, and I think that's kind of cool. Is that DNA that's worked its way through cinema in the most unlikely way, but it's still around. We're still getting movies like Possession.
Dustin
And then
Mills
it's
for The Burning and
legitimately
American
eerie
Werewolf in
when they're in the
London.
slaughtered lamb, and they ask about the star on the wall, and everyone goes
pentagram.
quiet. And the whole discussion of or it's a pentangle, not a pentagram.
Carly Sonnenfeld
and
for
I
Madman
thought it
and
was
My
really
Bloody
creepy
Valentine.
at the drive-in. I was like, what is this? And I thought it was spooky. JP was like, yeah, it's just kind of like a 6 out of 10 slasher.
So
JP from
not that
22
you didn't
Shots
grow up
for My
with
Bloody
the actual
Valentine.
movie, but
The
like
style.
you grew up with that style of movie, so
Yeah.
you gravitate more towards that.
Tyler Tadeo from My Bloody
I could be
Valentine.
wrong, but I'm pretty sure he was like a Ryan Gosling of the 40s, and then he's like gets roles like this when he's old and like
Alcohol is
a
bad for
Reservoir
you.
Dogs.
I'd seen
Ian Urza
your
for
typical
The
ones
Prowler.
by that point, your Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, all the Halloween movies, and I was looking for something more. This one and Maniac were the two that definitely made more of an impression when I watched both of those.
It's
Rebecca
become like a
Reinhardt for
time
Bloody
capsule
Birthday.
for me. Like it encapsulates so much about the early 80s, and I can see where you say Canadian. I think a lot of movies back then were made in Canada, and that might be why too. But they don't have any like real names in this movie, whatever.
Yeah. Jamie
Howling
Sammons for The
has
Howling.
always been my favorite, and I know it's like a toss-up between pretty much every horror fan. There's it's like two camps of people, like in Pulp Fiction, when there's either Beatles people or Elvis people.
James L.
And that's the
Edwards for
thing.
The
I
Evil
think
Dead.
you also brought up a really good analogy between that, as far as regional horror goes, between that, the original Night of the Living Dead, and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. I think a lot of that too. Part of the charm on all three of those films is because they were shot down and dirty.
Of course, the Sick on Cinema guys, Josh and Matt.
Somehow
for
this movie
Pig
looks
Chicken
more
Suicide.
grimy than like Begotten.
Well, it's like I was watching a lot of his like shot on video stuff, like Campbell Hookers. So I think Campbell Hookers is like really fun. And then watching something like Debbie Does Demons, which I did pay for. And I bought that fucking slipcover
Bought that
edition.
over Irreversible.
Joe Rubin for The Nesting.
Life and treatment experiences from the 20s through the 60s, and it's sort of uncharacteristically sweet.
And Dave Z
Well, you have to
for
have
Friday the
humor
13th Part 2.
for levity. You have to have a little. I'm not
Yeah.
against humor. I'm against what we see now. A lot of straight up comedy or a gimmick or making the characters excessively nauseating and a bunch of assholes.
The year 1981 is considered by many to be the best of the 80s, if not one of the best years in horror all around. There were many horror legend directors working in and out of the horror field at the time. Most of them delivered on some of the most influential and memorable films of the 80s. Although places like Italy already seem to be slowing down with their output in comparison to the years prior, we have been given uncountable slasher films and several films featuring werewolves. I do consider 1981 one of the best years of the 80s. Although maybe less all-time favorites than 1980, it still has a very rich and deep selection, even if a lot of those are slashers. In fact, it would be safe to say that the slasher genre never reached the highs of 1981 again. On a positive note, the films that feature graphic animal killings have lessened greatly. Although it is still there, we are seeing many countries completely shy away from it, unlike just a year prior, where Italy was one of the biggest guilty parties. The following year would shift a bit more into the more fantastical period for America, and eventually move towards the less nihilistic stuff of the 70s. And for the curious viewer, here's every film I watched in order.
What's going on out here?
Call the police. Tell the sheriff I shot him.
Who?
Tell him he's still on the loose.
Is this some kind of joke? I've been trick-or-treated to death tonight.
You don't know what death is.
His name is Madman Ma.
What do you say? I couldn't hear him.
His name is Mars. Madman Mars.
Chicken! I thought he's gonna drop his teeth! Ah, chicken! Willie shit! Willie shit! Ah, chicken! Willie shit!
اللواء في براسن دراكولا أمير الظلام.
And you will face the sea of darkness and all therein that may be explored.
I know I'm human. If you were all these things, then you just attack me right now. So some of you are still human. This thing doesn't want to show itself. It wants to hide inside an imitation. It'll fight if it has to. But it's vulnerable out in the open. If it takes us over, then it has no more enemies. Nobody left to kill it. And then it's won.
Son of a bitch, you moved the cemetery, but you left the bodies, didn't you? You son of a bitch, you left the bodies and you only moved the headstones! You only moved the headstones! Why?
For a girl like you to come into my life, I've been waiting for a girl like you, the love that will survive. I've been waiting for someone new to make me feel alive. Yeah, waiting for a girl like you to come into my life.
You bitch! You called me a bitch!
What's in the basket?
How do we know she is alive?
Say, please stop it. There's no more time. You've got to. Please stop it. Stop it now. Turn it off. Turn it off. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it. Stop it.